This is one of the craziest stories ever. So, my parents stole my baby so they can give it to my brother so he can pretend that's his kid so they can get an inheritance from his in laws. It's insane, and I'm not going to allow it to happen, no matter what. I used to think losing a baby was the worst pain a person could experience. I mean, what could be worse than that? I would know because for months that was my reality. But no, I never thought there could be something worse than that. But there was. It was the betrayal of those you call family, learning that your baby was well along but was stolen from you by none other than those who you trusted to take care of you in critical condition. I know, all of this must just seem like it's really hard to believe and a bit too messy to understand. Let me give you a bit of context. About a year ago, I was 17. Far too young to be a mom, and according to everyone around me. But when I found out I was pregnant, I instantly knew I wanted to keep the baby. I knew it would be difficult, but something in me told me that I would do anything necessary for this little life within me. And giving it up was not an option. I wasn't an easy decision, it was not. My parents made it clear as they possibly could that I was making a huge mistake. They literally left no chance to lecture me on how difficult it would be, how my life would be simply ruined, and how I was throwing away my future for a mistake. But I didn't see it that way. I didn't. My baby was no mistake. I mean, sure, we did not plan on it, but it was far from a mistake. I loved that baby's father. My ex-boyfriend, Kevin. Even though he broke up with me a month before I learned about the pregnancy. Why? Well, that's a story for another post, but hey. The thing is, I saw this baby as a second chance. Something could give my life meaning, even when everything around me felt uncertain and chaotic. I thought that maybe, just maybe, having this baby would help me feel the love I once used to receive from his dad. The pregnancy was hard, and being a young pregnancy, there were tons of complications, and not just physically, but emotionally. Every day felt like a battle, but I kept telling myself it would all be worth it in the end. I imagined what it would be like to hold my baby and to feel that connection everybody even talks about. It was the only thing that kept me going, but that moment it never came, and the night, well, I went into labor. Something felt off from the very beginning. It was a difficult birth, more painful than I could have ever imagined. And then when it was all over, the doctors tell me the worst news imaginable. My baby had been stillborn. I couldn't believe it. No pain could have ever been worse. It felt like my world had been ripped apart, and there was nothing left but a void where my child should have been. I cried for weeks. Every day felt like a haze or grief. I could barely get out of bed. I could barely eat, barely function, and all I had was that unbearable silence. The absence of the baby I had been so ready to love. My parents tried to comfort me, but their words felt so hollow. I didn't want their pity, their reassurance that I would move on and get over it. I didn't want to get over it. All I wanted was my baby. But then I learned the wicked truth. But before I tell you guys that, there's something else I need to mention, or perhaps somebody else, my brother. Yes, I have an older brother, Jack, who got married about 5 years ago to Maria. Though they have been married for 5 years, they do not have a child of their own due to medical issues that I'm not really sure too much about. I don't see much of them anyway, so they both live in the next town closer to Maria's family. Growing up, it's always feeling like Jack was the golden child. He was older, smarter, more successful, at least in my parents' eyes. No matter what he did, he could do no wrong. If he got in trouble at school, my parents brushed it off like, "Hey, buddy, no big deal. Boys will be boys." But if I so much as broke the curfew by 5 minutes, they'd be all over me, lecturing me about responsibility and how I need to do better. Jack was always their favorite, and I guess part of that's because he was their firstborn. My parents seemed to think that he could handle anything life threw at him. He was the one they poured all their hopes and dreams into. They pushed him to go to the best school, helped him get the right internship, and even pulled strings to get him his first job. Meanwhile, I was kind of left to figure things out on my own. If I asked for help, they would give me this look like, "Why can't you just be more like Jack?" Yeah, exactly. Well, It wasn't that they didn't love me, but their expectation for me was much lower. When Jack succeeded, they bragged about him to anybody who would listen. But when I did something well, it was nothing Jack hadn't done before. He could have had a bad day, and they would drop everything to make sure he's okay. But if I was upset or stressed out, they would tell me I was being dramatic and overthinking things. Even as an adult, nothing changed. When Jack messed up financially, they were quick to come to his rescue, helping him with whatever he needed, but when I needed just a tad bit of support, whether it was emotional or otherwise, I felt like I was asking too much. It was as if I was expected to just handle things on my own, because, well, that's how it's always been. Jack was the priority. He always had been. I guess it was all my fault. I should have sensed that things were off far before. How else could the parents who were so against me keeping the child come around and support me? I was so naive that I thought we reached an understanding that they accepted my choice. Little did I know that they were planning behind my back, conniving. Let me tell you what they did. Months after the devastating news, after months of mourning something that I never saw coming, I wasn't looking for anything. I had already resigned myself to the idea that my baby was gone. My baby was gone forever. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to be home that day. I had plans to go out with some friends, but I ended up canceling at the last minute because I wasn't feeling up to it. I stayed home, curled up in my room like I mostly have been since I lost my baby. I wasn't expecting anything strange to happen that day. I definitely was not expecting to overhear the conversation that would change everything. It happened while I was laying on the bed. Mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I heard voices from downstairs, my mom talking to someone. By the manner she was speaking, she was most probably talking to Jack. You could hear the honey right away. Normally, I would have just ignored it, but something in their tone had made me stop. They were talking quietly, hushed, like they didn't want anyone else to hear it. And that alone caught my attention. I couldn't make out every word, but it sounded serious. I got up, tiptoed over to the top of the stairs just to hear them better. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but once I heard what they were talking about, I could not pull myself away. It seemed like Jack was asking Mom about some medical document, something about a baby and a report. My heart started racing, because I could not figure out what they could be possibly talking about. Jack did not have a baby, at least not that I knew of, so what medical reports could he possibly be discussing? My mind immediately flashed to my baby, but that doesn't make sense. My baby was no more. Or at least that's what I've been told. Still, the whole conversation sounded suspicious. My mom kept mentioning things like, keep it quiet, make sure everything stays in order, and from the conversation I could pick up that Jack was worried too. I simply don't know what to think. What baby were they talking about? What medical report could my mom possibly have that Jack was so concerned about? I stayed there for a few more minutes trying to make sense of it all. But they wrapped up their conversation and I had no answers, only a few more questions. The next few days were absolute hell. I could not stop thinking about what I overheard. Every time I saw my mother, I felt this weird anger bubbling up inside me, but I had no proof of anything. No idea what was going on, really. I didn't want to just jump to conclusions, but I also could not shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Finally, I could not take it a second longer. I knew I had to find out the truth, even if it meant snooping around, so finally, yesterday, when my parents were out running errands, I snuck into their room, tiptoed. I felt guilty doing it, but I told myself that they were hiding something. I had it. I had every right to know. So I start plundering around through the drawers, their closet, anywhere they might keep important papers. And for a while, I didn't find a thing, and I almost gave up. But then, tucked away in a small little box at the back of the closet, I found it. Yeah, an envelope. It was full of medical documents. I didn't even know what was wrong with it, yet my hands were shaking. As I opened up the envelope and there it was, my heart stopped when I saw the date of delivery at the top of the report. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the report did not say anything about my baby being stillborn. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The report described my baby as healthy and alive. It was a weird feeling. It was relief, happiness, crashing down hard on that my baby's alive. Yet this feeling that the ground had been ripped out from under me, I
stared at the words on the page, my brain struggling to process what I'm reading. How could this be? How could my baby be healthy? Alive when they told me he's gone? I trusted them. I'd believed every word out of their mouth. Every word my parents told me when they said my baby did not survive. But now seeing these medical reports right in front of me, it was like everything I've ever known is a lie. I haven't said anything to anyone yet. I don't know where to begin. I still haven't been able to wrap my head around this. My baby was not stillborn. She's alive. She is alive. But where is she now? Update number 1. Hey guys. It's been 2 weeks since I first wrote to everybody, and 2 long, hard weeks. If any of you are expecting to hear good news, please hit the back button and save yourselves. Go outside, do something else. Because what I've got to share with you will shake you to the core. Before I tell you guys what happened, there's this one particular comment I have to reply to, who literally told me that whatever my parents may have done with the baby would be 100 times better than what would have happened to him if he had been left with me, a girl who's 17. Let me tell you one thing clearly, bud. 18 or not, the baby was mine. God gave her to me, I carried her for 9 months, I birthed her from this here body, and I would have sold parts of me to feed her if need be. Do you think anyone else but a mother could do that? Unless the crappy brain of yours could find someone who would love a baby like its own mother, I suggest you keep your little opinion to yourself. Okay, back to 2 weeks ago. After finding those medical reports, my whole world flipped upside down. It was seriously like my heart has been just ripped out of my chest all over again. But this time it was not just grief, it was full of rage. My baby had been alive this entire time, and my parents had hidden that from me. The betrayal, it's what you would say is suffocating, and so were these unanswered questions lingering in my mind. The next day, I waited until my parents were sitting in the living room, casually going about their day as if they had not destroyed my life. I couldn't hold it. I marched into the room, still hesitant about where to start. But when I saw their face, the same face that had comforted me, that told me that the baby was dead, something inside me wasn't right. It snapped. Without hesitation at all, I confronted them. I told them I know the dang truth, that I had found the medical reports and that they could no longer hide. I demanded to know where my baby is. My mother's face turned pale as Casper, and my father looked down at the floor, avoiding my gaze altogether. But they did not give me an answer. Instead, they tried to deflect, making excuse after excuse and claiming I was mistaken. They wouldn't even acknowledge the reports I've seen with my own 2 eyes. And, well, it was like I was talking to a brick wall. But I didn't let it go. I pushed harder, determined to get them to admit what they have done, and whatever chance I could get. I could not believe that they were still lying to my face after everything. I confronted them again and again over the following days, and I refused to let them live in peace, while my baby's out there somewhere and I have no idea where. Each time I brought it up, my mother would brush me off, telling me I'm emotional, and that I was not thinking clearly. She would try to change the subject or tell me to calm down. I couldn't calm down. How could I calm down when my child had been stolen from me? Well, finally, after what felt like an absolute eternity of this back and forth, my mother, she broke. I had cornered her in the kitchen this morning, refusing to leave until she tells me what the truth is. I could see the guilt and frustration in her eyes, and after what seemed like an eternity, she finally admitted, my baby was with Jack and Maria. The moment those words left her mouth, I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. But why? Was all I could say, but why? All this time, my own brother has been raising my child as if it were his own. My mind was racing, trying to piece together how this could have happened. How could my brother do this to me? How could they all conspire to keep my child from me? It was like my worst nightmares come true. But then my mother, her explanation only made things worse. She looked at me with a straight face and tells me that the reason they have given my baby to Jack and Maria was because they could not have a child of their own. She said, oh, she just said it, as if that justified everything, as if that somehow, in some universe, made it okay to steal my child and lie to me for months. I could barely believe the words coming out of her mouth. In her mind, they deserved my baby more than I did. They were more worthy because they've tried for so long and failed, and me? Oh, I was a teenager, barely able to take care of myself, much less a child. She went on to tell me that they saw this as some kind of divine intervention, as if God intended for Jack and Maria to have my baby all along. My mother even had the audacity to suggest that maybe I wasn't fit to be a mom yet. That maybe this was God's way of delivering the baby to the right parents. Yeah. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she had completely erased me from the equation. My pain, my grief, my loss, it didn't matter. All that mattered to her was that Jack and Maria got what they want. I stood there in shock, trying to process everything she was saying, but it felt like I was drowning in her words. But she just left everything. She left me standing there alone. My heart was broken. Not only had they taken my baby from me, but they had convinced themselves that it's the right thing to do. And the worst part was that they truly believed they were helping, that they were somehow doing me a favor by giving my child away. In their twisted minds, this was all for the best, the better plan. I wanted to scream, to yell, to shake them, and make them see how wrong they were, but I could not. I was too stunned, too shattered, and all I could do was stand there, clutching my heart, crying my eyes out. And a week or two ago, I thought I would do anything in my power to get my baby back. But how does one fight against a family? I don't know what to do. I feel helpless. All I want is to give up and crawl into a hole and let everything go, but it's... how can I give up on my baby? Please tell me what I should do. Update number 2. Hey guys, I'm back. Yes, I have an update. I know it's been, 2 months? Here's what happened. After confronting my mother, I confronted my father and told him how I knew the whole truth. His face was really something when he learned that his wife had broken down like that and let slip the truth. Instantly, I demanded to see my baby. However, instead of showing any sort of remorse and guilt, they got angry and forbid me to even think about seeing the baby. They even had the audacity to go as far as to say that the baby belongs to my brother, and I should simply accept the new reality. The one where I'm nothing more than an aunt to the baby. This conversation made me realize that I could not rely on them anymore. I tried to contact my brother and his wife, but they blocked me on all means of communication. I was helpless. I was desperate. Despite being among my own family, I quickly understood I could not stay in this house a second longer, not with the people who had betrayed me this deep. But I also knew I could not do this alone. So I reached out to the one person who had always seen me, truly seen me. My aunt, my mom's sister. She'd always understood the way my parents treated me differently from Jack, and she was the only one who could help me now. I hadn't spoken to her in quite a while, but I'm desperate, so I called her up. When she picked up, I did not hesitate. I poured everything out, what my parents had done, how they stole my baby and given him to Jack and Maria. I told her everything. And by the time I was finished, I was in tears. Aunt Jane listened up. And when I was done, she sighed deeply. She was not surprised at all by my story, and that alone made me feel a little less crazy. She tells me that she had always seen my parents for who they really were, and that she expected this level of craziness from them. Then she offered me a way out. She said that if I wanted, I could move in with her, but on one condition. I had to keep it a secret. She wanted no part of my parents' drama, and she didn't want them to know where I was. Honestly, I understood her reasoning, and I agreed. So, I packed my bags and left my parents' house. It wasn't easy, but I knew I could not stay there anymore. I needed space, and I needed to figure out my next step. Living with my Aunt Jane felt like a fresh start, a chance to breathe and think clearly for the first time in months. I got a job at Radio Shack. Shortly after moving in with her, it was not the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and it gave me something to focus on besides the chaos that's been my life. Every day, I went to work and tried to save up as much as I could. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not stop thinking about my baby. She's out there, living with Jack and Maria, and every day that passed felt like another day I was falling. I knew I could not stay away. So after a month, when I had saved enough money and felt ready, I made the decision to visit my brother's house. I had no real plan, I just knew that I could not sit back and do nothing anymore. I needed to see my baby, even if it was just for a moment. When I arrived at Jack and Maria's house, the first thing I noticed was the pile of mail sitting outside their door. It looked like they weren't at home, so I decided to pick it up, take it inside for them, and wait for them. As I sorted through the letters, one caught my eye. It was from the State Vital Records office. My heart started racing as I opened it. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but what I saw made my blood boil. It was my baby's birth certificate. Only it did not have my name on it. Instead, it listed Jack and Maria as the parents. They had actually gone so far as to put their names on the birth certificate, erasing me completely from my child's life. I'm furious. How could they do this? How could they steal my baby and act like it's theirs? I stormed inside, ready to confront them right then and there, but when I got in, the house was empty. Nobody was home except for the baby. She was lying in a cradle, just sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of all the chaos surrounding her. My heart broke as I looked at her. I couldn't believe that they had left her there alone, no matter how short of a time. It was like they didn't even care about her. I walked over to the cradle and picked her up, holding her close. In that moment, everything else faded. All I cared about was her. I hugged her tightly, inhaling that baby's smell, feeling her tiny warmth against me, and for a moment I felt whole again. But then reality hit me. I could not stay. I couldn't just take her and run, no matter how much I wanted to. That's when an idea hit me. I still had some things in my bag from work, not in the best quality, items that my boss had asked me to discard, but I had kept them thinking that I might be able to pawn them off. Among them were a few mini spy cameras that worked well enough for a basic surveillance. I had thought that they might help, but I didn't expect to have such an urgent need for them. Now they were the best solution I had up my sleeve. I knew it was risky. I didn't care. I needed to keep an eye on my baby, even if I could not be with her at all times. So with a heavy heart, I gently placed her back in the cradle and set to work. I planted the cameras around the house, making sure they were hidden, but positioned so I could see everything that's going on. I placed one in the nursery, one in the living room, and another near the front door, all connected to my phone. If Jack and Maria weren't going to take care of my baby properly, then I would. When I was done, I stood over the cradle one last time, looking down at my baby, and I wanted to take her with me so badly, but I knew I had to be smart about this. I initially came to confront Jack and Maria, but now that I've set up cameras all around, I don't want them to even get suspicious of anything. So, as much as I wanted to scream my heart out at them, I could not let my emotions get the best of me and allow them to see me. So, with tears in my eyes and determination to take my baby back, no matter what, I left that house. At first, I set up the cameras with the intention of keeping an eye on my baby. But now that I think about it, maybe it would help me get something on them that can help. Fingers crossed. Update number 3. This is the final update of the story. Hey guys, I know it's been 8 months. I'm so sorry. I've had a lot going on. I'm gonna get straight into it. So, as I told you, I set up cameras in all of Jack and Maria's rooms. After I set them up, I could not stop myself from obsessively checking the footage. Every day after work, I would sit down and watch everything, searching for anything that could give me some insight into what's really going on. It didn't take long before I started to piece things together. At first, there were little comments here and there, Jack talking on the phone about money, Maria pacing around muttering to herself about deadlines and how everything would be fine. Once the paperwork was done, it was clear that they were under a lot of stress, and it all seemed to revolve around money. Then one day, I heard what I was waiting for. Jack and Maria were in the living room, talking in hushed tones, and it turned the volume up and leaned in close, trying to make out what they were saying, and Jack mentioned Maria's father and the inheritance. That piqued my interest, so I listened even more closely. Well, it turns out Maria's father has a will, and his will was the reason they needed the baby. I knew her father was a very wealthy man and had no sons, but of course I wasn't aware of any will in which apparently he had written that if he did not have any grandchildren by the time he passed, 70% of his fortune would go to charity. But if there was a grandchild, all the money would go to them. It all made sense now. Jack and Maria had stolen my baby, my daughter, because they needed her to claim this massive inheritance. Turns out all the crap my mother gave them about wanting a kid badly was a lie. Without her, they would not be left with nothing, and the majority of the money would go to charity. They were banking on my daughter being their golden ticket, their way out of this mess that they created. But it wasn't just about the inheritance. As I continued to watch, I learned that Jack and Maria were in some serious trouble. They weren't just in debt, they were in deep with some local loan sharks, as they called them. The kind of people who did not care about things like legalities or due process. Jack and Maria had borrowed money from them, and now they were being bounded. To be hunted by some very dangerous people. The situation seemed to be getting worse day by day. I couldn't believe any of this. Even after all had happened, my brother and his wife had stolen my baby because they were so desperate to get their hands on Maria's father's money. And now they were in over their heads, and it's all these shady stuff. All because of their greed. It was disgusting, and I knew I had to do something, and fast. So guys, that's when I decided to get my aunt involved. She'd always been the one person I could count on, and I knew that she would help me. I told her everything I'd learned, and together we came up with a plan. I wasn't going to let Jack and Maria get away with this at all. They had stolen my daughter, and now it's time for them to face the consequences. With my aunt's help, I filed a legal case against them. It was a long, grueling process, but I was determined to fight for my daughter. The evidence was on my side. I had cameras, the birth certificate, the proof that Jack and Maria were trying to claim the inheritance with a child that wasn't theirs. The case was clear-cut, and eventually I won. My daughter was returned to me. Jack and Maria lost all claim to the inheritance, and they tried to play the system, but in the end it all backfired on them. But even though I won, I wasn't satisfied. Jack and Maria had put me through hell, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook. I knew they were still being chased by the debt collector, and I knew that they had moved back in with my parents to hide. All I needed was an opportunity to make them pay for everything they've done. Well, the gods finally decided to be on my side, and one day, I stumbled right into one of the debt collectors. It turns out they were really good at their job, and had reached town in search of my brother and his wife. They would have found them even without my help, but, oh man, it felt good when I accidentally let slip where he might find my brother and his wife within his hearing range. I know it was cold and calculating of me, but I did not feel guilty. Jack and Maria had brought this on themselves, and sure enough, a few days later, the debt collectors showed up at my parents' house, and I wasn't there to see it in person, but I heard what happened through the grapevine. The debt collectors demanded money. When Jack and Maria couldn't pay, they were forced to work for them to pay off the debt, and I knew it was not going to be easy. These weren't the kind of people who would just let things slide. Jack and Maria were in a rough time, and part of me felt satisfied knowing that they were finally getting what they deserved. Well, anyways, that's it for my story. I have a baby to raise.